What's up, guys? Just wanted to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Aptos. We'll hear more about how Bitcoin DeFi and Aptos is heating up later today, but for now, let's get into the episode. Nothing said on ZeroX Research is a recommendation to buy or sell securities or tokens. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and any views expressed by anyone on the show are solely our opinions, not financial advice. Boccaccio, Ryan, and our guests may hold positions in the companies, funds, or projects discussed. Okay, big day for me today and big day for you guys, I guess, last week with EigenZero. Before we get started with the questions, do you guys want to give a short? And I don't know who to pick here, so I'll let you guys decide on who wants to.
Go ahead, I was already chatting some, so.
But what is EigenZero? What should people be looking forward to, and maybe like a rough overview?
Yeah, amazing. Hey, hi everybody. It's Sreeram. Super excited to be here. Thanks, Brian, for doing this together. What is EigenZero, right? So as LayerZero leading bridge, right? So does I think more volume than Western Union. Brian recently had a beautiful comparison.
Oh, 5 times Western Union in the last month. So.
Ah, man, they're crushing. See, amazing. So you want to build a crypto bridge, and like one of the architectures underneath LayerZero is this idea of a DVN, right? Which is a decentralized validation network, which will actually verify the messages and move the messages across different chains. And a question that shows up is, how do you know that a DVN is secure, is honest, it's trustworthy? And you can have different mechanisms, right? You can have reputation, you can have many parties, it's decentralization. These are different mechanisms. A very crypto native mechanism, which is what secures basically all blockchains, is stake, right? Ethereum's secured, Solana secured, other chains are secured because somebody stakes and promises to run this network correctly. And can we have a similar mechanism for a DVN, which is some kind of crypto economic stake that is securing it, where if this stake secures this DVN and this bridge, it means that that this amount of economic security is backing this bridge. If this amount of economic security is backing this bridge and the operators are malicious in moving messages around, then they will lose their stake, and then they'll be slashed, and that money will be redistributed to the harmed parties, right? So this is the end-to-end flow. Over time, this will become like a fully insured bridge, right? An insured bridge is, when I'm transacting, if my bridge is broken because of an operator malicious action. So because I'm taking counterparty risk on an operator, because of that, if I'm losing money, then I will get redistributed. So that's the idea of this is combining the two things that both of us are building: eigenlayer, staking, slashing, redistribution, LayerZero, DVN, leading bridge. So we came together to build this product called EigenZero. Brian?
Yeah. I mean, the way I view it is, I think we can get into a bunch of this stuff, but effectively, I think there's been longstanding demand for how do you add an economic stake into this layer, and there's a bunch of different ways that people basically try to secure sort of different sides of this, and there's everything from from ZK proofs to economic security to like all of these different stacks. How do you make a stronger and stronger sort of validation or verification layer? There's 2 sides. What we did, one is the framework, which is kind of like the big thing. Like, listen, here's a framework that anybody can now apply and use to build this economic layer on top. So every application who is rolling something out, every asset issuer has the ability to do this. And you can imagine there's some pretty interesting times. People used to think, you need a huge amount, right? You need to have, hundreds of billions of dollars security to be able to do this. But so there's a framework, and then there's our implementation, which is like the EigenZero DVN, right? And so for us, we just put up $5 million of zero in that. And so you're asked, well, $5 million, given the amount of volume moving there, not a huge amount of economic security tied to this. What you can actually do, if you look at something like an intent layer. So if you looked prior, people talked a lot about like across and intent. So one of the biggest complaints they had against them was this 90-minute window to get the assets back. So you had a 90-minute sort of approval period to be able to unlock your assets on the other side. Now you have the ability to basically be able to do that every, call it 30 seconds, right? And so now you think about $5 million, you think about it as the size of your pipe effectively, where you could secure $5 million of throughput every 30 seconds throughout the entire day. So now you're talking about the ability to do, many hundreds of millions or billions of dollars daily, 100% completely secured with zero risk, right? And you can talk about the ability of asset issuers where you see sometimes assets choose to set pretty long outbound confs from certain networks. And you could say, hey, we're going to allow we're going to monetize. So CCTP or something takes a fee for CCTP v2. So it takes some amount of bips. And you could say, we're going to allow fast withdrawals or fast transfers out of this network that is a typically longer period of time. We're going to charge a tiny amount of bips on that, but it's going to be effectively instant. It's going to be backed against this, and this becomes the pipe. And so there's a bunch of like cool things that you can do. But I think the framework to me is the most interesting piece of it all, because what we're most interested in seeing the evolution of this sort of landscape of DVNs. And I think there are a bunch of really cool things where with a relatively small amount of stake and a relatively small amount of charge for bypassing for a faster window to have near instant, zero block conf or one block conf transfers out of any network and so on and so forth, right? You now can create a model that's actually like very, very compelling to the end consumer. You have almost instant experience when you're talking about intent layer stuff. You have almost instant getting your capital back on the other side, which now means you can quote like much cheaper because you don't have duration risk where you just like have assets that are not being useful for 90 minutes. So a bunch of cool things in there that I think will be downstream unlocks. But yeah, the first step is like build it, get it out in the world, and kind of encourage people to see what they do with it.
Yeah. I want to take one tiny step back just so that the listeners can have a better grasp of what's happening. So when you say DVNs, do you want to kind of run over why they're involved in this process altogether?
Yep. Yeah. So I will try to keep this. You tell me if you want me to be more technical, and we can go down a rabbit hole as much as you want. Effectively, every chain, no matter what, is just like an untrusted state machine. They do not know the state of each other. They don't know anything. And so something has happened on chain A and something is going to happen on chain B, right? So this most commonly is like some asset burn $1 million here, mint $1 million there. There's a bunch of different ways that you can tell chain B what happened on chain A. And sometimes people put, a middle chain in the middle, and they say our special little network of validators is going to tell the truth about what happened. And like Circle, CCTP, I just mentioned, right? They have their own attestation where they just say they run an attestation server and they say, this happened here, over here. Like I authorized this mint on this side because I saw this thing there. We always took the opinion that building a generic set of parameterization for all applications is just bad. You don't want like your 1 cent NFT projects to be paying the same for security as your and getting the same security as like an application doing billion-dollar transfers or multi-$100 million liquidations. Those are likely going to be willing to pay more for a much higher standard of security. So needing to force everybody to like one parameterization just makes everybody out of bounds. These guys don't get enough security. These guys overpay. And so the concept of a DVN was just it's abstract. This can be anything. Fast forward to today, there's about 52 DVNs on the network, and they look like all different kinds of things. These are big orgs. These are Ubisoft and Deutsche Telekom and Google, and these are groups like Nethermind and P2P, kind of like known entities. And then there's also things like Polyhedra, which is a full ZK proof coming out of Ethereum, which is like the aggregated signatures of the whole ETH community. There's all of these different things that people have built to provide this attestation layer. What you typically see when you have like a USDT Zero or an Athena or a BitGo, a WBTC, any of these, PYUSD, all of them get to define their own. And typically they're like, hey, like Circle, I want to sign off on these messages as well. So me, PayPal, or me, whoever, I'm going to create an attestation. but I also probably don't want to be the only one because you don't want to be like a single point of failure. And so then they'll backstop and say, I must be required, so I must have signed off on this. But I also want to include, Google and Nethermind and Polyhedra and Action Y and Z, right? So you'll typically combine some number of these, and you create your own sort of attestation layers. But DVN is just any mechanism that produces the attestation of state. And again, that can be, a single DVN could be 10,000 nodes. It could be a full network, and in Cosmos, sort of every chain could be its own DVN. You really can be anything. It's a very abstract concept. It can be a single node of some guy in his basement who wants to run a DVN. Doesn't matter. And then again, the applications themselves sort of choose what they want this set to be.
Perfect. That was a very sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the simple way is who's verifying the message is correct. Right? That's it. So there's it could be a smart contract, it could be a group of people, it could be like, they are staked, they are not staked. All these things are possible. This modularization helped like a bunch of experiments that can be done on, like Bryan said, 50 plus DVNs that have been built on top.
Perfect. And with EigenZero, Sreeram, you guys are incorporating your existing operators to opt into this and say, I want to be part of this DVN or not.
That's right. So I think Bryan said we have a framework and we have a particular implementation. So let me talk about the framework, right? The idea that, so firstly, what is the point of crypto economic security and why do we need it? Why, So this has been one of the core theses of EigenLayer, right? As EigenLayer has invented this paradigm of restaking, but the core idea is how do you supply crypto economic security to any kind of service and network? So that's kind of like the underlying value prop of EigenLayer. Now you can ask, like, why do you need a DVN? So there are 50 plus DVNs. Why do you need a crypto economic DVN? What is the special thing that it does? So when you think about it, when you make a system trustless, then it can scale because anybody can provision resources into it. So I'll explain this. If you make a system trustless, anybody can provision resources and the system can scale. So what do I mean by that? Suppose I have a new chain, okay, and I want to connect my new chain to, like, I want to build a DVN that's going to bring messages from my new chain to other chains. Now the problem is, if I have to go with an existing DVN, that DVN has to add support for my new chain. It's a whole thing. I've talked to them. They have to accept that they have to expand this to my chain. I could do another thing, which is if I can just build my own DVN to transport messages back and forth from my chain, that's something simpler. But then you'll be like, who the hell is Sreeram? Why would I trust messages signed by this DVN? But if I say, oh, the message volume on this chain is like, $10 million daily or $100 million daily, and I've put up $100 million of stake, then you don't need to know who I am, where I'm from, and like what my reputation is. So now, like, if I want to add my chain, I just add my chain, and then like I can throw in a DVN that actually validates my chain correctly, and you don't need to know who I am. So crypto economic security makes this system trustless. Why do I say trustless? Because either my message goes through correctly, or if the message didn't go through correctly, I'm going to slash the guy and get the money back. So net, I'm okay. So if you have a framework like this, then the DVN system can scale infinitely, right? Anybody can keep adding new DVNs to actually secure new things. And as long as they're built within this framework, and I know that I have full economic security and it's fully insured. So that's the real kind of like thing that we're going for here with this framework, is to enable a whole slew of permissionless, DVNs to be built, all of them secured with economic security, and therefore they can all be trusted with a similar grade without needing to know who they are, where they're from, whether I trust them or don't trust them. So that's the big thing that we're very excited about.
And again, the interesting point for me from earlier is if that $100 million of daily chain volume is distributed equally over time, you would only need $35,000 in stake to actually be able to secure that entire thing, right? It's typically not going to be equal, and you can set rate limit, or you can do all of these things to guarantee your pipe is sort of not being exceeded. But you can talk about being able to secure $100 million daily volume with maybe a couple $100,000 and comfortably never exceed the pipe.
That makes sense. Just to like clarify one thing for me, in the announcement, I saw that there was $5 million worth of slashable zero. Where does that come in over here? How does that compare to the $100 million 35K thing?
Yeah. So $5 million in zero slashable basically is, again, you can think about that as the throughput or the pipe. And so it depends on sort of what that's being set for outbound comps. But if you imagine 30-second period, well, now you can do $5 million sort of pipe every 30 seconds. So times that by 2880 for the daily volume. So, it's a big number for the amount of, 2880, 5 millions. You can do a lot of throughput on that. And even for us, when we're doing over $1 billion a day pretty consistently now. 99% of that is coveraged within this sort of like $5 million 30-second pipe.
Bitcoin DeFi is heating up on Aptos. With nearly 400 million BTC assets on chain, Aptos users can now earn yield on their Bitcoin via Eco aBTC and OKX xBTC without the typical bridge risks and high fees. To explore BTC yield opportunities on Aptos, follow the link in today's show notes.
As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions apply. Do your own research.
One question I have here is, what are some things that, Bryan, on your end, this seems kind of like it fits, right? Like it works because you have an existing system and you're adding something on top of it. Sreeram, I guess like my question for you is, was there anything that you guys were like, I don't know if this is going to work on our end, or if this is going to interact weirdly with other parties that we're involved with? Was this ever a concern for you?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is, we built this, earlier this year, we went live with slashing and later with redistribution. These are the pieces that were needed. Bryan and I did a podcast now, like more than, 14 months back, where we kind of like kicked off this partnership. One of the things I really love is building with long-term builders, people who are here and, have a long-term vision and actually like, working towards it. So really enjoyed like getting to know Bryan and starting to work on this. But, slashing and redistribution were not live. And those are two key features that were needed before we could actually, go ahead and build this product and showcase it. So in terms of like what was needed, that was the first thing, right? So, slashing needs to be live on EigenLayer, redistribution needs to be live. And this is, the first lighthouse project that is actually showcasing all these features, building it together. So that's as far as the core EigenLayer system's concerned. Now, I know there's all kinds of details on, how does the DVN actually work? How does slashing actually work? Who's the slashing committee? How is it constituted? What is the trust model? So again, there is going to be a lot of evolution on this over time. But starting to build the first one, how do you observe? For example, an L2 may make a claim and later say that they never made a claim, like a sequencer, right? Like think of a L2 sequencer, it makes a claim and it says, oh, I never made this claim. How do you observe this? How do you attribute it? Do you fault the DVN or you fault the sequencer? How do you attribute these things correctly? So there's a lot of like science that goes under the hood on this. One of the reasons, out of abundance of caution, we launched on a few handpicked chains to begin with, right? I think it's 3 chains to begin with. And over time expand to cover the whole gamut of chains is because of this feature, because of this issue of how do you observe, how do you attribute things that you kind of like, when you want to build a trustless system, things that you kind of slip under the rug. Oh, the sequencer said, therefore it should be right. But the sequencer said, now the DVN said, like, but did the sequencer tell the DVN or the DVN told you something wrong? Like you need to know these things correctly. And so part of the work, ongoing work actually is to actually identify these things. And wherever there was YOLO trust models, again, like chains that don't finalize, they chains that say they may have finality, but actually if you dig under the hood, you actually find out they don't have finality. Like these kinds of things are all problematic because we are aspiring for a high trustlessness in the bridging model. So lots of fun stuff for us to get into, like the rabbit hole there. But that's, I think, slashing, redistribution, core on the EigenLayer part. The first lighthouse integration with that. What are the conditions for slashing? What is the observability like? So more research, happening. But I would say this is one of those places where we are putting not just a spotlight on what's happening in EigenLayer, but what is kind of like other people are slipping under the rug in the rest of the ecosystem. So this kind of like sunlight is the best disinfectant here.
Perfect. Go ahead.
So I just want to say, like, we've talked a lot about what's taken to create EigenZero, but on the developer side of things, what is the unlock for that group of people? Like, what changes for those that can build on top of EigenZero, or that can build with EigenZero?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is as an application, your sort of role in this is to pick this group of this attestation layer for what your validation layer is. And so now you have this sort of like $5 million of slashable stake that's guaranteeing the transactions on sort of this layer that's happening there. And so what you have is, again, an option and your set of options that now is potentially more secure than what you had prior. And then on the other side, which I think from the framework side is what people find more interesting than maybe the specific instance, is you as any application or any asset issuer now have the ability to have your own. And so we had a huge demand actually for asset issuers who said, hey, we want to secure our own messaging and put up our own stake to, again, create like this Piper throughput. So now you might have you have asset X and you're some large asset and maybe you're moving $1 billion, $2 billion, $5 billion a month across the rails. You might want to put up X 5, 10, 50, $100 million in stake that one allows people in the community to like stake into this, and then allows them to potentially get yield if you're again allowing faster withdrawals, allowing people to bypass that. Again, if you go the CCTV route, you charge kind of a small fee for the convenience of this fast sort of bypassing of finality. So then the sort of mechanism bears the risk, but then there's some reward for that in terms of the overall throughput. So it gives you the ability to offer like a more dynamic product. And I think both users, we've seen really consistently, users are willing to make large trade-offs for like very fast experience. You see it with a lot of the some of the other bridging solutions right now are just like very, very fast, and they're being run out of EOAs, but they deliver like obviously just an incredible experience, just bam, delivered. And so people want that and they're willing to give it. And so if you can, as an asset issuer, give them that in a way that sort of is more economically secure, delivers the same experience, all of this, and it's both compelling for the asset issuer and compelling for the end user, and then gives their token holders some ability to again stake into this, participate in the overall security, etc. So I think there's a couple of vectors there.
And when you say people want speed, you're referring to like people want the speed, but they don't really necessarily want to give like a cut every time. So if you have a DVN on the back end.
Yeah, more like I think so. When we were building like Stargate, let's say, right, we were like very adamant that everything was 100% on chain, and you have these pools of native assets that exist, and you were doing verification on like a per message basis, and on and on and on and on. And then came Intense, and people were like, well, rather than waiting for 2 minutes for finality, I can get my asset in a couple of seconds. And who cares that, maybe there is only like one solver filling this, or maybe there's, in times of volatility, there's just like not going to be a market. There's no like censorship resistant aspect to it, any of those things. What the end user wanted. So you can basically frame it as the end user cared about the average experience and not about like the worst case experience, right? And I think most mechanisms in crypto have to design obviously in like a hyper adversarial permissionless environment against the worst case. So Uniswap, all these things are built to protect against the worst case. And what you found out in most of the consumer applications today is the users are actually optimizing for like the average case, not for the worst case. And so you started to see a lot of trade-offs where now there are a bunch of things that are literally just like straight EOA, just deliver, and they give an incredible experience. You quote off chain, you give them money, and they give you money on the other side. And like, they do a good job. They're a service provider. It's great. You've been able to trust them so far. You'll probably keep being able to trust them. No problem. And like people are again, there has been an appetite for that. And so what you have seen again is historically we were building continuously for the worst case. I think at the protocol level, you always have to build for the worst case. But actually, I think the asset issuers and the applications are building more and more for the average case of the consumer and trying to deliver an amazing average case. And I think what you want is to be able to give them a really compelling, easy way to deliver a really, really good average case while still doing it in a way that like maybe protects the user a little bit more or gives them these sort of more secure environment to do this in. And so I think from our side, that is sort of the unlock for the end developer. Because again, the developer and the user are chasing this average case. You want to give them sort of like the most secure, best way to do that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And one thing we talked about is how this relates to, I guess, asset issuers mostly. When you say asset issuers, do you specifically mean real world asset providers like tokenizing assets, bringing them on chain, or is this more like referring to general asset issuers, chain to chain?
Yeah, I view asset issuers and applications as a little bit different, right? Application is going to be Sushi Swap built swaps embedded in the application, right? And it's like originally it was like swap, bridge, swap, and now they've done all these other mechanisms to build out sort of like a fully functional application. Whereas an asset issuer might be like PayPal's PYUSD0 or PYUSD, right? And there is just an asset, and that asset wants to move, it wants to have more AUM. But at the end of the day, the asset issuer is issuing a single asset, and the asset is the thing, it is the product.
Makes sense.
Just adding a little bit there, there is a RWA type asset issuer, but also I think LayerZero has a format called OFT, which, if you're issuing a native on-chain asset, normally you have to choose a chain in which it's launched. But the omni-chain fungible token standard actually lets you launch a token which is across many chains. But then you have to decide like how the messages go across chains. So that's another example of an asset issuer, which is even just like natively on-chain assets. It doesn't have to be RWAs.
So one thing I would like to ask here is like for the developers, like just to follow up here, how should developers compare like I guess EigenZero to other DVNs? So I know that in the past, or I guess in the past, one criticism was that like DVNs, despite having like the capability like to choose whatever DVN people wanted, they would just go with like Google Cloud or some set of providers. From my point of view, it seems like EigenZero provides like a pretty easy funnel into like a distributed network, so that you don't have that like same centralization. Is that correct, or is there how else would you describe that?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit, and Sreeram, obviously you comment as well. I think it's a little bit different where the EigenZero DVN is not. There's like a slashing committee, and there's some distribution around that. The actual operation of the individual DVN isn't really significantly different than existing DVN. It just happens to have economic stake tied to it, right? It isn't this super wide distributed network, which again is something that people can do and likely will do. That's the point of the framework. This is more an example to show what can be done and how it can be done, and tying economic stake to it and sort of setting the stage for everybody else. I think the big things around the DVN spread itself is well, many people use you'll have overlap on a bunch of the DVNs. We have all this data that we can sort of like publish and show. So like actually LayerZero Labs DVN gets used a lot, but the LayerZero Labs DVN is never used like exclusively. And so if you actually look at the set, there's actually reasonable amount of split across applications where like almost all of the big applications, I mean, if you talk Athena, Ondo, USDT0, PayPal, PYUSD0, USDG, or PYUSD, not PYUSD, USDG, on and on and on, BitGo, WBTC, all these things, right? Every single one of them uses diverse, and like not a single one of those uses the same set of DVNs as any of the others. Huge amount of overlap between them, where a bunch of them may actually all share a DVN, but there's a bunch of others that are sort of mixed in there, and sometimes it's your own, sometimes other third parties, etc. So the point is like you want to build resiliency against, and the way that we always viewed it is, again, single parameterization is global exposure. That is broken. Everything is broken. And this If any of those happen to have all of their DVNs corrupted, broken, malicious, colluding, all of these things, it's still isolated only to a single asset. The broader network is like not affected at all. And I think what you want to do is, again, to continue to have this like bifurcation of, especially as you get larger and larger assets, or as you get these, you want there to be as little overlap between exact identical sets as any of them. And it gets harder and harder to think about a scenario of like broader corruption the more that you do that.
Yeah, just I want to add one thing here. This is, people conflate two different concepts. One concept is decentralization, another one is trustlessness or verifiability. And so, the whole idea of, for example, the roll-up paradigm is that you have a single node doing the computation, but the computation is verified, and therefore, like, you don't need to worry that the node can make a mistake. Or, in this case, that's the paradigm that the first, framework is actually showcasing. Is even if it's a single node doing the action, it has put up a collateral which is greater than the amount, volume flowing through for that time, and therefore, you're not really trusting that node. You're trusting that the mechanism to actually enforce the slashing and redistribution, as opposed to you're trusting that node. So that's a really good like model to understand, right? Because you don't need. So where do you need decentralization? Where do you need trustlessness? This is more on the trustlessness rather than on the decentralization. Second one is, this framework can be expanded to make it more permissionless for anybody to, as long as you put up more, enough stake, I should be able to sign off on a message. I don't need to be this one node. I can be any node. So make it more permissionless to do that. So those are the kinds of directions that we are headed in. So the idea being, even if in the normal mode only a few nodes are running it, anybody can spin up a node and permissionlessly validate if these nodes go down. So that's the two faults you worry about, right? Is the message sent correct? If it's not correct, you can slash them. If the node just goes down, it's just like robustness. You can have another node spin up and do it. So that's how we think about it in terms of like the decentralization versus trustlessness here.
With nearly 400 million BTC on chain, supported by a secure, fast, and affordable Move VM environment, Aptos has become the BTCFi growth chain. Aptos users can now earn yield on their Bitcoin via Eco's aBTC and OKX's xBTC without the typical bridge risks and high fees. With support from Eco, OKX, and Stacks' SBTC, Aptos is the place to go for best-in-class yield on Bitcoin. To explore BTC yield opportunities on Aptos, follow the link in today's show notes.
As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions apply. Do your own research.
I want to double click on something, or just to clarify, I want to ask, like, where does EigenZero fit in the grand scheme of the roadmap for LayerZero? From my point of view, LayerZero, there's been a lot of focus on asset issuers and providing verifiability to those asset issuers. And I see this across like different infrastructure providers as well. Like if I look at like both the Chainlink team or like Pith or something like that, those teams all are like partnering with asset issuers in the same way as LayerZero has with the Fireblocks engine, and they all have interoperability solutions that they're backing with crypto economic guarantees as well. Where do you see this like trending in the long run?
Yeah, I view it as a tool in a toolbox ultimately. Like I think if you look again, we just talked about last month, right? Last month at $38 billion, I think that translated to something like 90% across the market in terms of like value transferred overall, right? It's like asset issuers largely, by and large, stable coins primarily, and many others are building on LayerZero. And the question is, why are they building on LayerZero and what do they want, right? I think there's a couple of things there. One, for us, the large thing had always been, and I joke about it because it's like, job's kind of done because like the protocol is immutable. I couldn't change it if I wanted to. And that's part of the core guarantee to the asset issuers themselves, is that you don't have to trust us, right? The protocol is there. It is immutable. We cannot change it. It exists. You have comfort with knowing that there's longevity there. And then it is really like, okay, great. What do they want? Do they want decreasing latency, right? How do you get DVNs and sort of the off-chain workers that are creating these attestations? How do you build better clients that people can run? How do you incentivize other groups? So client diversity is something we cared about a huge amount, right? I think there isn't actually another group in the space outside of Ethereum who has as much client diversity. Like we have 4 pushing 5 unique clients now, a bunch built by teams that are, not us at all. We've built 2 of them, but there are 3 other unique clients built completely from the ground up. And so when you talk about like downstream effects of many other solutions right now, just push client updates and everybody accepts it. And if there's a bug in that, then it doesn't matter how many validators you have because there's a bug in the client. It's just everything is rugged, right? And so, there's a bunch of these things where we just continue to try to figure out how do we provide better, stronger and stronger guarantees to the asset issuers or the people building on top of the protocol so that they can deliver sort of a world-class experience to their end user. And I think this is like part of that approach overall. And I think, again, I continuously get these moments that are crazy for me because for me, I remember launching the protocol and I remember the first like dollars going through the protocol and everybody who's using it and like people are asking you questions to do everything. And like we were sitting there the other day and the team sent me 2 transfers and they're like, oh, hey, like $550 million just went through in a single transfer. And then it was like $800 million just went through in a single transfer. So somebody sent $800 million, almost $1 billion in one single message. And I have no clue who that person is, no idea, right? It's just like the protocol is there. It works, it exists, it's being used like in production at scale in a permissionless way. And I have absolutely no idea the participants, right? And like that is extremely powerful. And I think that's what you want is to build something that like supersedes you and people needing to trust sort of you and this solution that you're providing. What we're providing are tools for people to be able to deliver their own solution. Again, the asset issuers come in and they build with the OFT and they build with sets of DVNs that they like, and they build, they take this stuff that is existing, but then it's out in the world and like they're driving it and they're driving adoption and they're using it overall. And I think like that is how we view it, is we're going to continuously build better and better tooling that give the asset issuers what they need to be able to have their customers, not our customers, their customers come and send $1 billion in a single transfer. And like that itself is the thing.
That makes a lot of sense. I am kind of jealous that you experienced this feeling that somebody sent through $800 million. And, it is very awe-inspiring. Sreeram, I want to ask you the same question, but with a kind of a twist. I have we did a pod before as well. I'm not sure if you remember. It's okay if you don't. But and back then it felt like EigenLayer was very much like focused on building this system and was not particularly product focused. Versus now it feels like over the past 6 months you guys have become increasingly more product focused, and EigenZero feels kind of like that to me. Is this, I guess, like where does EigenZero fit into your plans, and where do you guys see going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So we built our core thesis at EigenLayer is Eigen in German for your own layer, right? You should be able to build what you want at the kind of protocol level. And so the way we've evolved from that starting point is initially we were like, okay, we have this powerful layer of trust that anybody can tap into and build whatever, decentralized protocol they want on top of it. And what we found is while this is great for like deep, complex infrastructure builders like a LayerZero or Infura, right? These are products building on top of EigenLayer. It is not good for a regular application developer. Like a regular app developer cannot just directly come and build an AVS on top of EigenLayer. It's extremely complicated. And so, this is like bare metal, right? And so the way we've started thinking about it is like, if you think of like a cloud, right? And in the cloud, the base layer of a cloud is a data center, right? If you are OpenAI, you want direct access to the data center and directly build something on top of it. And so that's how I view this like EigenZero, partnership between LayerZero and us. They're like OpenAI, they have their own customers, they have like huge distribution. They want to build something bare bones, powerful, bare metal. And so they can directly use EigenLayer. Whereas most developers, I'm just building an application and I want to use an AI agent in my application. I'm building an application. I want to use, off-chain compute verifiably, right? So there's a broad category of use cases that application builders want, and they don't have the tools to go and build an ABS by themselves. So we launched 2 new services, EigenCompute and EigenAI, which is basically run off-chain compute. Give me a Docker container, go build. It goes and runs it off-chain and then brings the result back on-chain. Using it, different trust models. So that's an example of us taking the step to go closer to product, closer to users, closer to developers, right? EigenAI is something similar, right? I want to run an AI inference, right? I want to bring that result on chain to make an action. And I take this action, I do this inference off chain and bring the results back on chain, but in a trustless, verifiable manner. So those are 2 products which are much more abstracted, much easier, right? So one of our friends who's a hardcore engineer, like Colin told me, man, it's so hard to build an AVS. It's so easy to build on EigenCompute, right? And it's kind of like that. And this mental model of data center and like bare metal data center and services built on top actually is a very good model to think of, like EigenLayer and then the services that we've built on top, right? Very powerful builders can go and actually directly configure the data center to do what they want. But most application builders want highly abstracted. Like if you go to AWS, you want a storage service S3, you want a compute service EC2, you want an AI service Bedrock. This is what you want. What we've built is EigenDA is our data service, EigenCompute is our compute service, and EigenAI is our inference service. And so when I build an application, I'm not any more restricted to the developer environment, EVM or Solana or whatever. I can actually run something off-chain and then bring those results back on-chain, in a very fast loop. So, and one of the big things we are actually envisioning here is AI agents. If I want to build AI agents, I need both, compute to be verified, the input data streams to be verified, and the AI to be verified. And so by mixing and matching all these things, you can actually get really powerful experiences built on top.
Perfect. I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess one last question for both of you. Again, you'll have to decide between yourselves who wants to go first. But so what is the next step for EigenZero? When are we going to get some exciting updates on who's onboarded and what is the, let's say, 6 months? Although I'm not an engineer, so I don't know what timelines look like. So maybe you can give me a better timeline estimate as well.
Yeah, I think I'll start. I think the most exciting thing in all of this to me is the framework, right? It is what are other people going to come and build. And so I think if you want to look 6 months forward and say, hey, was this, did it work? Did the market care? Was this successful as a product? I think what you look at is how many other people have come and built? What other developers or assets have come and used this as a framework to actually build their own? And so I think the things that are interesting is when you start to see these other large assets, and again, all of the ones that I named effectively, and start to say, hey, are they rolling out sort of their own mechanism of slashable stake? Are they putting this up? Where are they using it? Is this to make sort of intents have faster rebalancing? Is this to make it so that you have again, like an instant bridging option for OFTs? Is this to do X to Y to Z? And I think there's a bunch of interesting paths that people can take it down there, but it starts with somebody from the asset issuer side saying, hey, this is something I want to do. And again, we've had inbound interest of people saying, I want to take my own asset and allow people to stake into this. So turn it into like a community token style mechanism that has this reward back to those people for sort of like the risk that they're bearing on the underlying chain side, or whether they just do it themselves internally and kind of what that looks like. And so they from the foundation side or from whatever, right? So I think there's a couple of different things, but like Sreeram said, the end result is that the user has a trustless experience because it has stake that is bound more than the value that is being transferred. And so they don't need to think about what the option set is for DVNs, what any of these things are. It is just, is there more economic stake? than what is current throughput going through the pipe? If yes, great, everything is perfect. And so I think, yeah, for me, again, the 6 months is just who adopts it, what does it look like, we're both people who build largely as sort of groups for the end developer. And so while us launching our own thing is cool and is interesting, and seeing usage and adoption would be nice, I think both of us are much more interested in seeing developer adoption and the end users of the underlying protocol. Actually, like that's where real growth comes from. And so that for me is that is the measure of success.
I know I know Box had one more question, but I do actually have one more thing that I would like to ask Sreeram. So, and I could be entirely butchering this, but I recently read about like a kind of a cyber attack using AI agents, there was a international like cyber attack with AI agents for the Claude Code tool, and I'm curious if there is like an angle here for verifiability, because it seems like this is like a prime area for something like this to be involved. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, great question. It's an interesting angle, but I think it's not an easy problem for us to solve. So let me just state like where trust lies in when, for example, when you're using an AI system. So the first one is what I call our runtime trust. So maybe let's just contextualize on a simpler example. Let's say trading agents. Okay. So I want to use I want to use a trading AI agent, right? Why do I need it to be trustless, secure? I'm giving it some money to go and do my trades. So, what if I give it money and then like it goes and buys? So let's say like Grok comes up with an automated trading agent, and then it goes and buys a bunch of Dogecoin, okay, or GameStop or something, and then people may lose money, and then they're going to be like, oh my god, it's Elon like made Grok buy like Dogecoin or GameStop, and then like I lost money. So it's a huge liability surface area for a Grok or ChatGPT. In fact, ChatGPT came up with an advisory or update to its terms of service last week, saying that no legal advice, medical advice, health advice, or even human advice. I don't know. They excluded all kinds of advice. And like the reason is they're worried about liability, right? Because now as they're kind of like becoming more and more central. So when you think about the input-output interface to like ChatGPT, you don't know what's running in the backend. You're just like, oh, that's ChatGPT. Like that's what you know. Like you don't know what it is that you're talking to. So the first level of trust is I can guarantee, like Eigen can, for example, guarantee that it's this AI agent with this specific code, this specific model with this specific weights, and this specific compute, which is actually doing this task. That's what we can guarantee, right? We can get just like exactly what Ethereum guarantees for smart contracts. It says this piece of code can only move your money, right? Same thing. This AI agent is this piece of code, this piece of data, this piece of inference together. That is what can actually touch your money. Now, if that piece of code, is it good or bad, right, is outside the purview of like what we can underwrite trust for, right? Just like Ethereum, like, somebody can write like a balancer smart contract, which has a bug, right? Or somebody can write like a thing that doesn't have bug. But that's not a thing that Ethereum knows, whether it's a bug or not. It just knows this piece of code can run this piece of money. So I think of two layers of trust in AI. Like one is the code, is it like, break the black box and know this code's running your thing. But is that code doing what you think it should be doing? That's another layer of like, trust. And the way I think that we resolve that as a society and like what we can play a role is in insurance, right? So normally, these are risks, right? So you don't know that a code. So imagine there's a travel agent that's booking tickets, right? And I say book a ticket from SFO to SEA. I'm thinking it's Seattle, but it's actually booked a ticket to Southeast Asia, right? And so like suddenly I'm like, okay, now I lost my money and paid $2,000 to book that ticket. And so you can use things like, but I know I'm talking to this model and this model makes errors like 1% of the time. So somebody, maybe like an EigenLayer stakers, can come and underwrite that risk as an insurance and say that this model makes an error 1% of the time. Somebody loses money because of that, I'm going to pay them back. How? By collecting money from all the people in the normal mode. This is exactly how insurance works. So that's the kind of thing that we can do for the software. This code is running, but this code did something mistake. And so things like cybersecurity attack are the hardest because it is like a code. I know this code's running, but somebody figured out how to cheat this code and extract all the money from it. So then you're out of luck, basically. Right now, we need to know how to build systems that are actually more robust to that.
That makes sense. Okay, Sreeram, then asking the same question that I asked Bryan. What does the next 6 to 12 months look like for EigenZero on your end? What are you guys focused on?
Yeah, I think Bryan's totally right. Like our main goal is always developer adoption, right? So that's our kind of like, we are a developer platform, so we want developer adoption. More developers come and build on top of it. We already, like Bryan mentioned, after we posted this, we got a bunch of people asking us, hey, how do I come build a DVN using this framework? So that's really what we want. And other developers taking this up and then going and building new and interesting things on top. So in terms of the underlying technology itself, we will continue to research and evolve this. Both of us, a portfolio of Andreessen Horowitz, and their research team has actually helped us a lot in thinking through like all these observability conditions I was talking about. How do you attribute who's actually at fault if a sequencer lies or if a DVN lies? So those kinds of things, we will continue to evolve the underlying framework and make sure that you can actually like support a wide range of chains and conditions. Yeah, so on our side, we improve the underlying framework. On the developer side, adoption, uptake, and more asset issuers choosing these things. And over time, if something like this becomes the standard where I don't need to know who the developer is, I don't need to know who the deployer is, I can just directly check it's a cryptoeconomic DVN, it has X amount of stake. I don't need to worry about anything else. I think would be the good end state for us.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. Guys, I want to thank you both for coming on. This was really fun. Before you go, I assume everybody follows both LayerZero and EigenCloud and is familiar with what is happening. But do you want to give, I guess, like what should people look into? What should people read about? What should people be focusing on? What do you want people to come with?
So maybe I can start. Because we announced this new umbrella brand, EigenCloud, right? Think of a cloud. The underlying layer of the cloud is a data center. The underlying layer of EigenCloud is EigenLayer because it's decentralized, distributed, cryptoeconomic data center. On top of which we have these services, DA, compute, and AI, EigenDA, EigenCompute, EigenAI. So there is a huge number of new unlocks for developers with compute and AI. You can build many interesting new things very, very quickly, including things like AI agents, games, agentic payments, all these things. So I would urge so we just launched this developer website. Let me just put the link here. I don't know if the users can see it, but developers.eigencloud.xyz, basically explaining some of these things. So excited for users, the viewers to check this out and build new and cool things. I think one thing I just want to say abstracting out is crypto has been infra constrained for a long time. I think with the set of things we are building here, crypto is no longer infra constrained. So there is, for whatever you can dream up, you can build today. Because you can use off-chain compute, you can use on-chain compute. All the chains are connected with things like LayerZero and EigenZero. So you can build pretty much anything you can think of. But I think people are still stuck in the mindset of like where infra was like 1 year back or 2 years back. I think the ability to express much, much more complex computation trustlessly, verifiably has grown. So like the call to developers is think of new and cool things that you can build on top of it.
Yeah, I think for us it's similar, right? I think I've said it a couple times recently. I think people right now, obviously, a bunch of our attention has been that's been where we lived right now, and we've had a crazy amount of adoption. It's been amazing. I think stable coins have been a huge boon for us, and we just continue to see growth in terms of numbers and metrics and how people are using it and what it's actually happening. And rolled out things like we talked about at the beginning of this, like direct deposit into Hyperliquid, and all of these other tools that just make it easier and easier for people to like do the things they want to do at the asset side. I think people are going to be really, really shocked over the next 6 to 12 months how deeply we've bridged the gaps into some of the other sides of the market, and the institutional side, into the sort of adoption across sort of like everybody who is now coming into the technology versus prior, which I would say is like the more native side of things. And so for us, if you're interested in building really any asset, any piece of technology, like we want to have the conversations. We're actively engaging with everybody across the board around this stuff, even just how you think and ideate around it, how you design mechanisms across multiple chains. But for anybody else who's listening, I think follow along, and you should see more of what you have seen. I think the next couple of next year is going to be incredible.
Very good. Very excited for both of you. Guys, again, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having us.